So today we're going to dive into an analysis that's, well, it's not really about finding some big final answer. It's about something I think is way more powerful. Using data to find a better question. Let's get into it.
And this idea right here, this is really the heart of the whole story. It comes from the analyst who did all this work, Alex Kim. And what he's doing is reframing a problem, not as just something to be solved, but as a reality we need to question. And honestly, that's a super powerful lens for looking at everything we're about to see.
Okay, so to really get why this analysis even exists, we've got to start with a personal story. It's one that connects a childhood memory to this big, universal idea about how we see the world.
So Alex, the analyst, he grew up in South Korea back in the 80s. He was living with his entire extended family right behind his mom's restaurant. And get this, sharing one single bathroom stall with dozens of people. That just felt normal. Why? Because, that's how everyone lived. It wasn't until he started seeing other ways of life, other realities, that his own situation really clicked into focus. It's that old saying, right? You just can't miss what you've never even known exists.
And this actually brings us to a really classic philosophical idea. You've probably heard of it, Plato's allegory of the cave. I mean, think about it. If all you ever saw were shadows on a wall, you would swear those shadows were reality. But then what happens if you turn around? You see the fire, the real objects, the world that's creating those shadows. Your whole world changes, right? Well, that's what data can be. It can be that light that shows us what's real, beyond the shadows of our own assumptions.
All right, so with that big idea in mind, that whole Plato's cave thing, let's bring it back down to earth. Let's pivot to a very real, very pressing problem happening right now in the United States, specifically in California.
And this is where you find this just massive contradiction. I mean, California is an absolute economic titan, right? It's the wealthiest state in the US. Its economy is so huge, it's like the 5th largest in the world. And yet, it has one of the highest child poverty rates in the country. That paradox, that's exactly the kind of thing that just begs to be questioned. Seriously, let that sink in. 1 in 4. 1 in 4 kids. In a state that we all know for Silicon Valley, for Hollywood, for just immense wealth. A quarter of its children are in poverty. That's not just a number on a spreadsheet. That represents millions of real kids living real lives. So that naturally leads to the question, okay, what's being done about it? Well, a major tool in the toolbox is CalFresh. That's California's version of the SNAP program, food benefits. And look, it absolutely helps people with hunger. No question. But the team here asked a bigger, tougher question. Does it actually reduce poverty, or does it just make being in poverty a little less painful? And as soon as they started digging into the data, things got weird. The first clues were really puzzling. For instance, the extra benefits during the pandemic, they didn't help all families the same way. And get this, weirder still, wealthier counties often had better CalFresh outreach just because they had the money and infrastructure. But here's the real head-scratcher. A county having really good outreach didn't automatically mean it had lower poverty. It was pretty clear, pretty fast, that this was not going to be a simple A plus B equals C situation.
Okay, so this is where the real data science kicks in. The team knew they needed a model, something to help them cut through all that noise and see what was really driving poverty. So let's take a look at how they did it.
All right, but before you can build any kind of fancy model, you have to do this crucial first step. It's called exploratory data analysis, or EDA for short. And the analyst here uses a perfect analogy. It's like baking a cake. You wouldn't just eyeball it and throw ingredients in a bowl, right? No, you measure, you check things, you get a feel for what you're working with. Skipping the EDA step, that's like trying to bake a cake without any measuring cups. Sure, you might end up with something that looks like a cake, but it's just not going to work.
So the team's first attempt at a model was a little shaky, a little unstable, because they were working with a pretty small data set. So they switched to a much more solid technique. It's called a bagged decision tree. Now, I know that sounds super complicated, but the idea behind it is actually simple and kind of brilliant. Basically, you take your data and you create a ton of little mini versions of it, all shuffled up. Then you train a simple little model on each one of those mini sets. And for the final step, you just average all of their answers together. What that does is it smooths out all the weird quirks and gives you a result that's way more stable and reliable.
So, after all that work, after building this clever model, what did it find? Well, the answer was just staggering. It wasn't unemployment. It wasn't education levels. It wasn't even the reach of the CalFresh program. The biggest predictor of poverty in a county by a long shot, it was the kids. The percentage of children, specifically under 18 and under 5, accounted for almost 90% of the model's predictive power. 90%. Just wow.
So what does that mean for a program like CalFresh? Well, the data is basically saying it works more like a thermometer than a cure. It's a fantastic tool for telling you where the fever is. High CalFresh usage means there's high need. It points right to the problem. But it isn't the medicine. It's not the main thing that's going to reduce that underlying poverty. If you want to actually move the needle, the model is pointing its finger directly at policies that are centered around children.
And this is where we circle right back to where we started. This huge finding, it's not the end of the story, not at all. It's the beginning. It's the kickoff for a brand new and much more focused conversation.
There's this great quote from the statistician George Box. He said, "All models are wrong, but some are useful." And that is the perfect way to think about what we're seeing here. A model is never going to capture 100% of our messy, complicated reality. It can't. Its job isn't to be perfectly right. Its job is to be useful, to help us get a better handle on that reality.
And being useful means you have to be honest about what you don't know, right? About the limitations. For starters, this analysis was only looking at the COVID years, which were unique, to say the least. It's also looking at county-level data, which can totally hide what's going on in specific neighborhoods. And of course, it didn't even factor in other gigantic costs like housing, healthcare, or childcare in California, which are just crushing. So yeah, it's an incomplete picture, but it's still a very useful one. So what's the big takeaway here? I love how the analyst puts it. He says, don't think of this as the final finished report. Think of it as track one on a longer album. It's that opening guitar riff, the one that sets the whole tone and gets you hooked for a much deeper investigation. It's all about sparking those new questions.
Think about it. We started with a pretty broad question about an anti-poverty program. But by really listening to the data, we ended up with a question that is so much sharper, so much more focused. If the presence of children is the #1 predictor of poverty, then what systemic changes do we need to make to truly support families? See? The data didn't hand us the answer on a silver platter. It gave us a better question. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most valuable thing data can do for us. So what's the next question we should be asking?